I am Tim Walsh, and I'm here to teach you how to take control of your health through food and cooking. Learning how to cook is one of the most valuable skills you can ever pick up because of how much it changes everything else that happens in your life. It's going to change your relationships, it's going to change your health, it's going to change the way you interact with food and with others, and it's going to actually change your confidence. When you have confidence with the food that you're eating and the food that you prepare with others, you get to enjoy life a little bit more, and you get to enjoy those interactions with other people in your life that much more. And the reason this is important to me is because for so much of my life, I didn't understand how food and health interacted with each other. And because of that, I actually had really terrible health for most of my life. And I'll get into that a little bit later about what I learned and how I figured out how to get through it. But the amount of effort I had to go through to learn that is way more than anyone else should ever have to go through. And so my mission and my vision is to teach people how to take control of their health through food and cooking, and then be able to actually enjoy it because it's delicious and it's fun. Because I'm never going to tell you to eat food that tastes like garbage unless it's like the healthiest food in the world. And even then, I'm going to try to find ways to make it delicious for you. And ultimately, human beings do what's easiest and what they enjoy most. And so that's how I approach cooking. How do I make it easy? How do I make it enjoyable? And part of that enjoyment is making sure it always tastes good. We're going to improve your health by virtue of just preparing your own food at home. The number one factor that indicates the quality of someone's health is how frequently they prepare food at home. So if for no other reason, I just get you to cook food at home more frequently, your health has improved, which I'm going to feel great about because I want people to live in a healthier, happier, more fun state in life and be able to enjoy their food. You're going to be able to nourish the people around you. One of the best ways to connect with other people is to show them you love them as much as you can with the foods that you serve them. The effort that you put into it, the thought that you put into it, just the fact that you're sharing it with them shows that you care and you're nourishing not just their body, but also the relationship you have with that person. You're going to save a crap ton of money. When you cook your own food, you save a lot of money because you can pick the higher quality ingredients and you're not paying someone else to cook them. You're not paying someone else to cook them poorly. And these days, you're not paying huge delivery fees. Like, I hate ordering food through Uber Eats, not only because I know I can cook better food at home, but because of the like $15 surcharge that magically pops up every time that wasn't there when you're trying to figure out something easy for dinner. So you're going to be able to have better relationships, save money. It's also a great disconnect from screens. If you're staring at a monitor all day long, getting away from that, looking at food, these real vibrant colors, using your hands is a really great way to disconnect. Let loose some stress, let loose some steam, and let your creativity come out a little bit. And there's really three things that stop people from cooking. And that's something we're going to address over and over and over again. And those three things are, it feels like effort, right? Some people think at the end of the day, oh, I'm done working. Why would I work more? They lack the confidence. They don't think they can cook something. They see something on TV, they see something in a cookbook, I'm like, oh, I don't think I can make that. Or it doesn't look as good as the picture on Instagram. And they simply just don't know how. No one gave them the skills, no one gave them the blueprint to figure out how to cook phenomenal food. And the good news is we're going to address all three of those. We're going to address it every single time we're on a call because they're just the fundamentals. You're going to gain confidence because we're going to do it together. I'm going to show you what good looks like. I'm going to tell you how to avoid bad because I've screwed up enough things enough times that I can tell you how to avoid that. And I can tell you what it looks like and I can tell you how to fix it. You're going to gain the ability to be able to just walk into your kitchen, open up the fridge and say, what do we got? I'm making dinner. And know that you're going to be able to make something delicious with basically whatever you got sitting around. And I'm going to teach you the know-how. I'm going to teach you the skills. I'm going to teach you the techniques. We're going to learn all those things together so you can walk into any kitchen and impress the people that are there and really cook delicious food. Uh, I mentioned before that I was going to dive in a little bit deeper about my own health journey. And when I was a kid, I suffered from really terrible allergies. I I had hives covered my body all the time, big red itchy hives. I was just scratching my arms all the time. I'm a small kid. You can't control yourself. You don't have the wherewithal or self control. And my nose would just get so stuffed up and runny, and I had asthma, and I just felt like garbage all the time. And you can imagine that my mom having a kid that felt that way, any mother who has a kid that feels that way, does everything that they can to help them. And my mom did. She she put filters on all the air vents in the house. She put bottles of Benadryl everywhere. There was basically a bottle of Benadryl every room in the house. There was one in her purse. There was one in the car. There was one like stashed away at church in case she needed it somewhere. Like Benadryl was the only thing at the time that would help my allergies not totally freak out when my body basically went into a state of shock. And my mom did everything that she could. She's a wonderful human being. I'm so thankful for everything that she did. But it it didn't solve the problem. And I kept suffering for years. And we went to allergists, and the allergists did tests, and the tests are not fun. They especially weren't fun back then. Uh, they would take little tiny metal pricks and they would dip it in things they think you're allergic to. Then they'd prick your back. They'd do that again and again and again. Back then, the science wasn't very advanced, so they didn't know how to do advanced sorting. They didn't know how to do A/B testing, so they could rule out a whole bunch of things. So when I was 8 years old, they pricked my back more than 300 times to figure out what I was allergic to. And then they put me on a regimen of shots where every single Friday I had to drive an hour to the allergist to get a shot in each arm. And I'd sit there for an hour with my mom in what should have been her free time, waiting to see if I had an allergic reaction. And if I did, we had to adjust the shots for next time. And if I didn't, then they still had to adjust the shots for next time because they knew they had to give me more of whatever they were giving me. And I got those shots every single Friday from the time I was 8 years old until I was 17. And all they really did was get me to about normal. They helped, but they didn't really fix the problem. And I didn't know what the problem was for the longest time. The thing that put me onto it, though, was it was twofold. It was that I started caring more about my weight and my physique. So I started doing research about better diets. And the other was that when I was doing this research, I remembered something that my allergist told me about Benadryl. I remember the one medicine that helped me. Benadryl, back in the day, if you can remember, was this red liquid that tasted atrocious. I can still taste it when I think about it. Benadryl had a red food dye in it that 60% of all people who have allergies are allergic to. I'll let that sink in for a second, or how ridiculous it is that a company that makes a medicine for people with allergies included a red food dye that serves no purpose other than to make the medicine red, that 60% of people who have allergies would be allergic to. So the same medicine that was helping me was also hurting me. And I remember this when I was researching about diet and reading from all these different experts, whether it was paleo or keto or plant paradox or slow carb or Atkins, any of these folks. One theme came up over and over again. And it's that there's things we're taking into our body that are damaging us. Those things are food. Some foods don't damage us. Some foods really nourish us. But some foods totally destroy our body. And growing up, we thought we were eating a healthy diet. We followed the food pyramid. We followed what our health teachers taught us in school. The same teachers, I might add, who did not look very healthy when they taught us these things. But we were following this guidance. Plenty of grains, lots of dairy, good amount of veggies, an okay amount of meat, very few sweets. What was that same diet that was slowly killing me, causing me to have allergic reactions all the time, causing me to miss out on many of life's events because either I was at an allergist getting shots or because I had allergies so bad I couldn't go outside because the pollen would set me off. I mean, I was allergic to dust mites and pollen, and I grew up in Wisconsin on a small farm. Imagine trying to get away from dust mites and pollen when you live on a small farm in the middle of Wisconsin. It's impossible. Those things wouldn't have really mattered though had we known the truth about food and which foods help you and which foods hurt you. And as I mentioned before, I went through enough that I don't want other people to have to go through that same struggle. No one should spend a decade trying to figure out how to feel good. Getting a phone call. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I share this with other people, because I know that you can take control of your health through food. I've done it. I've taught it to other people. And I'm really passionate about it, partially because I'm also passionate about cooking. I love cooking. I started cooking when I was 4 years old. My mom got frustrated that I woke her up every Saturday morning asking for French toast to go with my cartoons. And eventually she just figured, he's going to keep asking. I might as well teach him how to make French toast. So at 4 years old, my mom taught me how to make French toast. And I've been in love with food ever since. I've been cooking like a madman. I'll be honest, my food probably wasn't very good until my early 20s. I was still cooking though. In that time, I learned a lot. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you on these calls. Today, so that's my story. I wanted to share that with you so you understand where I'm coming from and you understand how much I care. Today, I'm going to be teaching you some basic knife skills, and we're going to be making what I like to call messy French fries. And at the end of today, you're going to be able to cut pretty fast, cut really safe, and you're going to be able to have a pretty simple dish you can kind of whip out whenever, whether it's you want a quick snack at home, a side for dinner, or if you want to bring it to someone else's house. These are great skills to have. I think knife skills are the number one skills to have in the kitchen. It's the number one time saver for multiple reasons. One, you're just faster. If you have good knife skills, you're faster at prepping food in the kitchen. Number two, the thing that's going to slow you down most in the kitchen is if you get injured. If you have to run to the ER or urgent care, that's really going to take up basically your whole night. You're going to get a nice little bill later. None of that's fun. But when we have proper knife skills, you never have to worry about that. You're going to be safe. You're going to be fast. You're going to be careful. And you're going to have more fun. So if you have not already, now is the perfect time to preheat your oven. You want to preheat it to 450 degrees. So I'm using this knife tonight for a very particular reason. It's a really cheap knife. But for a cheap knife, it's really good. And I want to use this one to illustrate that you don't need an incredibly expensive knife to be able to cut foods in your kitchen really effectively. What you need is a very sharp knife. The safest knife in your kitchen is the sharpest knife you feel comfortable wielding. So if this is an 8-inch blade, if you don't feel comfortable with a knife this big, get a 6-inch knife and work your way up. Maybe after you get comfortable with a 6-inch knife, you get a 7, an 8. An 8's pretty standard, but don't let anyone tell you that there's anything wrong with a 6-inch knife. Because as I said before, safety is going to be the number one thing here. And if what you're doing in the kitchen isn't safe, if what you're doing in the kitchen doesn't feel safe, you're not going to do it. You might hurt yourself, which is even worse. So I'm going to go over the anatomy of a knife real quick. I'm going to give you a couple quick techniques that are super fast to learn, but will last you a lifetime. And then we're going to start prepping our potatoes together, and we're going to cook those up. And by the end of the class, you should have some really delicious potatoes. Now, my story went a little long. So your potatoes might finish slightly after we're done with the call, but I'll show you exactly what they should look like and what to look for. So regardless, I'm not going to leave you hanging. We're going to take care of you. So here's our knife. This is the butt. This is the handle. We've got the bolster right here. This is a really important area. That's where the handle comes to the blade. Heel of the blade, pretty self-explanatory. Tip of the knife, If you're at someone's house and they're asking you to use a knife where the tip's been broken off, that's a really bad sign for how they treat their knives. They probably have not sharpened any of their knives in a very long time. So test the knife on something first, see if it's any sharp. And if it's not, just defer the chopping to someone else who owns that knife, so it's not your responsibility. What we've got up here is the spine of the knife. The spine, the important factor you might want to know about for the spine is just the thickness. It tells you about that knife and its sturdiness. So this is a German style knife. The blade's fairly flat at the bottom. The spine's fairly thick. It's a really sturdy, robust knife. This right here, this is a Japanese style blade. The spine is a lot thinner. This blade is great for when you want to make really tiny thin cuts and it feels really light and beautiful in the hand. You wouldn't want to use this for boning a chicken though, because the blade is fragile enough that if this nicks a bone, it might chip the blade. So you might want both styles. You might want a German style knife and a Japanese style knife. You might just want a German style knife and that's what you use most of the time. Japanese style knives often usually have much more of a curve to them than German style knives. So those are just a couple of quick anatomy things. Another thing you'll hear people talk about, so if you're ever knife shopping, you'll hear things like the tang of a knife. The tang indicates how far the blade goes into the handle. So this is a partial tang knife where the blade is only going in probably about here. It's a little nub of the metal in here and they formed this plastic on the end. And this is reference, this is a Victorinox Fibrox chef's knife. It's about $45 on Amazon. It used to be $35, but America's Test Kitchen kept talking about it. So now so many people bought it, they raised the price $10. It's a really grippy knife. Even when it's wet, you're gonna have really good grip on the handle. The handle is also non-porous and antimicrobial. So even if you have the chef's knife you really like, once COVID lifts, I recommend you pick up another one of these or your first one of these, because if you ever have a guest in your house and you don't know what their knife skills are like, you can have them use this $45 knife. And if they ruin this, you won't cry. But you also know that you're giving them a knife that's plenty sharp and plenty safe. So you're gonna never feel bad about giving them this knife. So this is a partial tang blade. And then right here, I've got a full tang blade. And you can see, got the spine up here, the metal goes all the way through the handle. And that's what full tang is referring to. Often full tang is regarded as a higher quality knife. It's not always the case. I've got some Japanese knives where it's a partial tang knife and they're actually really wonderful knives. Just keep that in mind as one of the factors that people will talk about. It can also adjust the weight of the blade. So those are a couple of really quick things about knives. A question I often get is, what is the best chef's knife? The best chef's knife is the sharpest knife you feel comfortable using. There's no such thing as a best brand. There's good brands. Some knives have different features and such, but for the most part, you don't have to worry about that. So here's our knife. We hit the anatomy real quick, and I'm going to show you the two techniques that are going to make the biggest difference in your cooking and your prep. And the first is the pinch grip. So we use our index finger and our thumb to actually have the most control of our knife. And we put our index finger right here, right in front of the bolster, and our thumb on the other side, and we're pinching the knife. You can see I'm holding the whole thing with just those two fingers, right? And then the rest of our fingers hold on for a little bit of power, a little bit of extra control. But if I hold on to the knife like this and I'm chopping, it's really easy for me to lose control of the knife and have it twist in my hand. And twisting and losing control is a really great way to twist and lose a finger. When I'm pinching it, I have complete control over the angle. This thing isn't going to twist out of my hand. I have way more control of what's going on. And what's even better, this is a big knife. You don't always need to hold it all the way back. If you want a little extra control, cutting really small, you can pinch all the way up to the front if you really want. You don't need to tonight, but you can pinch all the way up to the front and cut something really small if you really need to. So that's the pinch grip. That's how you're going to hold the knife. Next is how we're going to hold the food and how you're going to protect your other hand. So you pinch with your dominant hand. You do the claw grip with your non-dominant hand. And the claw is middle finger right on top, and then your index finger and your ring finger right behind it, like this, right? And we put it down on the cutting board like this, and we just bend this first knuckle a little bit. Really important, your pinky and your thumb should be tucked back. Ideally, they're holding on to each other because it's really easy to be cutting and forget about your pinky and thumb if you don't tuck them back. And all of a sudden, you slice off your pinky, and that's not what we want. So if you keep them back here and you keep your fingers in a claw grip, you're never going to cut yourself. You don't even have to look at what you're doing. So what you do is, and if the angles at any time you're not seeing what's going on, call it out. We're learning together, and you are basically like my business counsel right now, or my board of directors. So if you need something, you let me know. If you don't see something, you let me know. I'm here to serve you. So we get the claw grip here, and you can see there's a little bit of a light gap down there from how my fingers angled back. And on this knuckle right here, that's where the knife's going to ride, actually. So the big flat part of the knife rides on that knuckle. And you'll see I'm not looking at the knife, I'm looking at the screen. Look at the camera. I could do this really fast, but it's totally safe because the knife has a barrier that it rides on. It's got a plane that it rides on, and my fingers tuck back. Now, one thing to watch out for, that sometimes people will get a little overzealous and will start raising their knife really high. What can happen if you raise your knife really high is you go up too high and you go up past the knuckle. If you go past the knuckle, it's really easy to go down and chop into the knuckle. So what I like to say when it comes to knife skills is slow is fast, fast is smooth. Practicing your knife skills is not about speed, it's about safety. The bonus is that when you get good at this, speed happens. It's not the goal, it's the outcome. So be careful. First time I taught a knife skills class, one guy got so excited and he lifted his knife up too hard and he nicked his knuckle right away. It wasn't crazy bad, but I had just talked about not doing it and then he did it. So be really careful and just carefully ride that knuckle. So I'm going to grab my potatoes now. You're welcome to cut along with me. And if you're ever in the market for a new honing steel, something to keep in mind, you want your honing steel to be about 2 inches longer than your longest blade. So most of my knives are about 8 inches. You can see the height difference in these. This one is, I want to say this is a 12-inch steel because I probably, at some point, I'm probably going to get a longer knife, and I figured a longer steel doesn't hurt. But if you've got an 8-inch knife and only an 8-inch steel, try looking for a 10-inch steel. It just gives you more room to work with. There's a bunch of different ways to hone. Brian, I saw you were just honing it one way. You can do the knife. You can do it like this, which is how I usually do it. I've had a lot of practice though, so I'm pretty good at keeping a standard angle when I do this. You always want to do the same number on each side. So if you do 10 on one side, do 10 on the other. 6 on each side is usually about enough. Another way to do it, you put the tip of the honing steel on the cutting board and you bring the knife up, down, up, down. This one's a little bit safer when you're just getting started. But it's always good to hone your knife before you start cutting. It keeps things sharper, longer. Honing is different than sharpening, and we can get into that another time. So, potatoes. We're going to chop this bad boy up. But potatoes are a really great food to start with because they have no flat sides and they're really wobbly. And in cooking, when we're cutting things, we're always in a constant search for the best flat side. So if I try just cutting this into pieces, and this is even better, it looks really round. If I try cutting this right now, it's not stable. It's going to roll all over the place. So I need to make a flat side on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my claw grip to hold this bad boy in place. My pinky and my thumb are either going to be back here or they can go on the back side of the potato to help give it more stability. And then I set my knife with the claw grip. The left hand here, the claw grip, is actually what determines the size of your slices, not the hand with the knife. If I want really big slices, I move this hand back in big chunks. If I want really small slices, I move this back in really tiny increments. So here, I want some flat sides. Cut that off. Make another flat side, roll it over, flat side, roll it over to myself, one more flat side. So you can see this thing's got a bunch of really nice flat sides. While that's going on, so you're getting started, cool. While that's happening, I recommended in the email that went out earlier that you have 2 bowls. And that was actually a perfect time to get those out if you don't have them already. One bowl is for the pieces of potato that we're keeping. One is for the parts that we're cutting off. And this is called the trim bowl. Every time you're at a cutting board cutting things, having a trim bowl is a great idea because it speeds up the process and it keeps your work surface cleaner. So I can take all these pieces I just cut off, throw them in my trim bowl, set them off to the side up there. It's not piling up on my cutting board, and it means I don't have to make constant trips to the trash or the compost. And the reason I call it trim instead of waste is these things are often still useful. So if you're peeling and chopping a bunch of carrots, you don't need to throw those skins away. Throw them in a freezer bag, use it later to make vegetable stock. If you're chopping up a bunch of potatoes and you don't know what to do with the edges that you cut off to make it flat, throw them in the freezer bag again, let them pile up, and the next time you make mashed potatoes, add these to the mashed potatoes, and you just got that much more volume without any waste. So it's a trim bowl rather than a waste bowl. So we've got 4 flat sides on this potato. Now we're going to cut some big flat discs, basically some planes in this bad boy. So I'm going to aim for maybe about a little over 1/4 inch in thickness, and I'm controlling that with the Coggin. When I come down, I slice through, and if things are sticking, which will definitely happen with the potatoes because of how starchy they are, what you can do is take that index finger, put it over onto the other side, and grab that potato, and pull your knife back without lifting up. Just pull it back, and you get the knife out without it sticking nearly so much and without exposing any of your fingers to a blade. So now I've got these 4 beautiful discs. Okay, so now we're going to cut these into sticks. And what's cool is this is the same technique you use on basically any vegetable if you want to cut sticks or if you want to cut big slices. You do the same thing on carrots, you do the same thing on cucumbers, zucchinis, potatoes. It's the same process over and over again. Potatoes are just nice and big, so we get to practice on something nice and big. So what we're going to do is rotate this 90 degrees so our stacks are stacked up. And then before you cut anything, it's good to push down on the top. And did you see what happened right there? I pushed down, and that slid. And what that tells me is this isn't stable enough for me to start chopping yet. So I'm just going to take one of those pieces off, and I have this big, beautiful flat side now. I'm going to flip it over, try again. Now when I push, it's really stable, nothing's shifting. So now I've got something safe to cut through. So I'm going to do the same thing I just did before for the sticks. I'm just aiming for the same thickness I originally got. So on this side, I could probably get three lines. It's only 2 cuts. And now I've got these big, beautiful sticks for French fries. And then you can take that last piece that came off and you can cut that separately. I'll just talk through what I'm doing. So flat side, flat side, flat side, and one more flat side. Looking for a steady base. That looks good. Really starchy, sticky potato here. Wow. Yeah. And last cut. Flip it over. That is not stable. Boom. Best flat side. Cut it again so that we're aiming for fairly squarish pieces. So you can see from like this one, I went a little beefy on it, but we've got a pretty good square on that cut. So if you've got a chunk of potato like that and it's not stable anymore, you have the exact right instincts. Flip it over to its best flat side and then keep cutting. So I'll demonstrate some other cuts you can do here. I'm gonna get some flat sides. Move these over to our trim bowl. And I like that side cut. So I'm gonna go with a really thin cut on the edge here. And I'm controlling the thickness or the thinness with my claw grip. I'm gonna go real thin on this second cut. So this cut is probably maybe 1/8 of an inch thick. What we do is kind of the same thing we did before. We start with sticks. We can try to cut those sticks the same thickness as the rest of the slice. And you'll notice when I'm doing this, and it might be hard to tell because I was doing it straight on. When I'm cutting, there's a lot of rocking going on. That rocking helps make sure I cut the entire piece of food from the beginning to the end. And if you chop like this, especially on knives with a really prominent curve to it, you'll notice how little of the blade actually touches the cutting board. So if you always chop like this, a lot of your food doesn't get cut. You'll run into food that looks cut, but then the edges are still attached or something. So a movement like this is often what you're going for. I'm exaggerating it a bit here so you can see what's going on a little better. You can think about it kind of like how the wheels on a train move, especially on the engine at the front. You know, there's that bar that moves around the wheels, and so you're kind of acting like that bar. So I've got a bunch of these really thin strands here. I'll cut to 1/8 of an inch. And if I rotate them, so I go perpendicular, so I have more control over what's going on. I do the claw grip again, we do this every single time. And I do 1/8 of an inch again. And you'll notice here, my pinky and my thumb aren't staying back holding each other. What they're doing is they're pinching the food that I'm cutting so that I can control that food a little bit better, but they're still well behind these 3 fingers in front. So what I'm doing here.
And then your back fingers are like feeding it in.
Yeah, so with this, because the potato's so soft, they're not able to feed it in all that well. But if I was using, say, like a carrot, there's 2 ways you can approach it. Some people like to feed the food forward, so they push it forward with, say, their back thumb, so that they're not moving his hand and they're pushing the food through like a conveyor belt. I actually find that technique's actually difficult to master well and use safely. And an easier technique is to use your thumb or your pinky or both as an anchor, either on the cutting board if you're cutting something small, or on your food, and to use that as an anchor to pull your fingers back. So you'll see here, my thumb is down on the cutting board. I've kind of got an exaggerated claw up here, and I'm pulling the fingers back because I've got that anchor to be able to control things. If my hand's just up here, it's really hard to do that fine muscle control to move it. Back here, it's really easy. So we've got this really fancy cut here. This is basically just a bunch of little tiny 1/8 inch cubes that has a fancy term of brunoise. This you'll sometimes run into in soups or stocks. They'll have this very fancy French soups, might have really tiny cuts like this. You'll run into it with, say, carrots sometimes. It's just a way to cut food really tiny that sounds fancy, that can be cooked pretty quickly. And sometimes you would do it in a soup if you don't want that food to be a major part of the texture. For the most part, the average person, the main reason for a brunoise is you're at someone's house or they're at your house and you want to impress them with your knife skills. That's one cut. Another one that's good. Oh yeah, okay. So we're gonna cut just like we did before. I'm gonna cut these so that they're big flat planes. Check for stability. It's a little loose. I'll just do it with these 2. We're gonna cut sticks again. And again, we're aiming for the sticks to be about the same thickness as our first cut, so they're pretty square. Once we've got these square things, we're actually doing the same exact thing we did with the brunoise. But when it's a larger size, we call it something different because we had to complicate it for you. So make it a larger size. And what we're doing now is dicing because they look like a bunch of little playing dice. We've got a bunch of little cubes that are fairly equal in size and even so that they're going to cook evenly. It's another benefit of better knife skills. Your food's not going to burn as frequently because the food you're cooking is going to be a more consistent size. So everything will cook at the same rate rather than small things cooking really fast and big things cooking really slow. So we want to take that pan, that pot, rather. We're going to throw our fries in there. So I'm going to use this guy. Throw my fries in here. So what we're going to do is toss your fries in here. I'm going to go to the sink and we're going to put about an inch of water in above the fries. We want to do cold water. We're going to throw this on the stove. We're going to bring it up to boil, then reduce it to a simmer once it hits boil and let that continue for about 10 minutes. At that time, we take it out, we're going to season it, and then we're going to bake it. This is about what you're aiming for in your final fries. You're actually going to get a lot of color. They're going to be pretty crispy. And that won't happen if we don't adjust the starches at the beginning. By par cooking them, meaning partially cooking them in our water, we're adjusting that starch. We're allowing some of it to kind of come out on the surface and break up some of those starch molecules. And then cooking in the oven is actually technically cooler than cooking in water. So we're allowing those crystals to cool a little bit before they then bake and dry out and turn into a beautiful crispy crust. I'm a big fan of using your hands in the kitchen as a tool because your hands are some of the best tools you've got. So instead of trying to like measure what an inch above your food is, you're just always eyeballing it. I like to use my finger as a depth gauge. So you can put your finger in, put your thumb up against wherever the water line is, pull it out and see where your thumb ended. And then you know exactly how deep your water is. So this water is about an inch. Again, we don't have to be perfect here. Cooking is a little bit more of an art. When we talk about baking later, there's parts of it that are science. But for the most part, it's pretty artistic. So you can be flexible. I'm going to put this on a stove. Put it on high heat so we get to a boil as quickly as possible. That will probably take about 10 minutes before it's a boil. And then and put a lid on so it gets to boiling a little bit quicker. It takes about 10 minutes to get to a boil. And then it'll probably be another, well, not probably. Then we want to reduce it to a simmer and do it for another 10 minutes. After that, we're going to strain it in the sink. And then we'll be ready to season it and bake it up. So we want to add a little bit of salt into our water right now. It's going to help pre-season the potatoes. It's also going to help keep the water from getting too bubbly and overflow. Biggest part is going to pre-season the potatoes. So again, we're using our hands. So you're aiming for probably about 2 tablespoons of salt. I'm using my fleur de sel here. So I just put the salt in, give it a really quick stir, and that's about it. Then we put the lid back on, and in about 10 minutes, that'll probably be boiling. We'll just keep checking on it as we're going. Check the water, almost boiling. You can see the starches starting to come out of the foods already, and if you look really close, it'll be easier to see in your own kitchen. So water's boiling quite a bit. You're going to turn the flame down a lot. There's going to be, it's a pretty, you can even see that. It was like this. Now it's pretty small. This is what was called a rolling boil. We do a simmer, which is like there's some bubbles coming up every once in a while. So nothing too crazy. I'm going to set a 10-minute timer for that. So nice. My potatoes just finished simmering on the oven. I'm going to turn the heat off, and I'm going to take this and bring it over to the sink, strain it. So I wanted to call out something else that I was doing here, and it's how I carried the pan over. You notice I used my kitchen towel, and I grabbed the handles on either side because the handles were getting pretty hot, and it sort of wrapped around to carry the whole thing. That allows me to carry it really safely. Kitchen towels are actually some of the best oven mitts you can have. Our potatoes have been strained. I'm going to add them into this bowl. And in just a minute, why I call these messy French fries is going to make sense. What we've got here is our potatoes where the starches have been affected by the boiling and then the simmering. What we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of pepper and some oil. So actually, we're going to start with the oil. So some olive oil. You can use the garlic olive oil we just made, or you can use this olive oil. And we're going to eyeball about a quarter of a cup. And you'll notice that I haven't said any measurements for anything or used measurements rather. I said tablespoons, now I've said a quarter of a cup. I haven't shown you specific measurements because I want you to learn through experience what things look like by eye and be able to trust that even if you don't get it perfect, it's probably going to turn out great. And the reason for that is one of the most important factors that distinguishes someone who likes to cook and someone who says that they don't like to cook or they don't feel comfortable cooking is whether or not they depend on a recipe. And if someone depends on a recipe, they typically say they don't like to cook. But the moment you get someone to no longer depend on a recipe, more specifically measurements, having to measure out a quarter cup of oil or measure out 2 tablespoons salt, more quickly you get someone past that stage and into trusting their instincts and just flavoring things by eye, the quicker they start to love cooking because cooking becomes more fun, right? We didn't have to measure or dirty a quarter cup measuring cup. We didn't have to dirty a tablespoon measure. We were just using our hands and going to town and enjoying the process. So very frequently, I'm going to encourage you to eyeball what you're doing. If it's really important and we have to measure, I'll call it out. For the most part, we're going to eyeball things, and you'll see later how flexible your food can often be. So good bit of oil. We're going to give it a good bit of black pepper. If you really like black pepper, you can add more. And if you don't like it so much, you don't have to add quite so much. I like black pepper. And when you have piles of food in a bowl, it always looks like you're adding more seasoning than you are because you're just seeing what's on top and not seeing everything else. So that's all the seasoning we're adding right now. The salt and any other seasoning we're going to add, those are going to happen later. And here's where the messy bit comes. So it's not messy in that you get your hands messy. It's messy in that the potatoes break down a little bit because we soften them in the water. And some of the potato breaks up and turns into almost like this little slurry that helps coat the potatoes to create a really uneven surface. And that uneven surface increases our ability to brown the potatoes and get a good crispy texture. So just spin the bowl around, give it a little toss. So some of your potatoes are going to be a little bit craggly. If you get in really close, you can see that all this texture on the edges of the bowl, that's signs of the potato. Yeah, I'm looking at like 3 different screens. It's really hard to get this right. That's all signs of the potatoes breaking down a little bit, and we're getting that slurry, which is going to help us get a really good texture. So that boiling step, the boiling and simmering, is actually dramatically changing the chemical structure of these potatoes, which is going to be the thing that you'll notice when you eat other potatoes in the future. When they don't have really beautiful texture on the outside, it's often because someone didn't play around with the starch of the potato. You're going to be using a glass pan. I'm using a big metal sheet pan. You're going to want to put a dab of oil on the bottom of that. And just, now our hands are going to get messy. You just spread it around with your hands. Usually I will encourage using either parchment paper or aluminum foil on the bottom of your pan to reduce cleanup later. But in this specific instance, your potatoes would stick to aluminum foil too much, and your parchment paper would burn because the heat of the oven is too high. Good rule of thumb is if the heat is set higher than 400 degrees, so up to and until 400, parchment paper is fine. Higher than that, use aluminum foil because parchment paper can burn at 425. So it's possible to light on fire in the oven at 425 and ovens fluctuate in their temperature quite a bit as they're cooking. So up
Especially
into 400, parchment paper. Beyond 400, probably aluminum foil or coat your pan in oil. So now we just take our potatoes and we're going to spread them into the pan. And if you have a lot of potatoes, you might want to use two pans so you can eyeball it. We just don't want mounds of potatoes. These are still pretty hot, so I'm using a spatula to spread it out. If we have mounds of potatoes, what we end up doing is steaming them because the moisture from one steams the other. If we separate them as much as possible, we're baking them. And this is true of basically anything you're baking in the oven. This is why you hear experienced chefs talk about don't crowd the pan. Because one of the things you end up doing is you don't saute, you don't bake, you steam. Because what you're doing is you're just building a steam trap for all the ingredients, and they're just steaming each other. So these are spread out on the pan. They've got a good amount of space. I'm going to put these in the 450-degree oven for 25 minutes. Halfway through that time frame, I'm going to rotate the pan. Since most ovens are not very even with their heating, you rotate halfway through so that you keep from hot spots screwing up your food. Then we get to 25 minutes. We're going to flip these over. So you're going to see that golden brown bottom side. And with the glass pan, might not be as much on this first flip. Totally fine. We'll probably still get there at the end. We're going to flip them. Then throw them in for another 12 minutes or so. Rotate the pan again. And then we're going to do another 13 minutes. So we do 25 chunk and a 25 chunk. And they'll be done at the end of that. I would suggest, so it's a rotate, flip, rotate, and at the end they're done. I would suggest after the second rotate, so that's 38, 37 minutes in, you check on your fries. If they look like they're almost done, you don't have to finish the full 25 minutes of that second half. You can take them out a little bit early. If they've got good color, they're done. Use your eyes. Your eyes are more accurate than a timer because everyone's oven's a little bit different. And the size of your cuts are going to affect the doneness of your potatoes. I'm going to slide these into the oven. I'm going to set 2 timers so I keep life nice and easy. I'm going to set 1 timer for 12 minutes, which is a reminder to rotate it. And I'm going to set another timer for 25 minutes, which is the reminder to flip them. So rotating the pan, there's nothing fancy here. It's literally just, we're taking the pan out and we're turning it around. So pull it out. There's a little bit of color showing up, a little bit of texture happening, nothing too crazy yet. Just rotate it, put it back in. And if you have a second timer going, then you're set and your 25 minutes is going to keep going. If you don't, set another timer for about 13 minutes right now so that we hit that 25-minute mark. Just in case, I'm just going to talk you through what the last steps are for the potatoes so that if you decide that at this point you want to know how to finish, you're all set. So what we're going to do is we've done our rotate. We're going to do the flip in a couple minutes. And we give it another 12 minutes, rotate, and then another 13 minutes, so 25 minutes total on that second half. You're done. Take them out of the oven. They probably won't need to go longer than that 25 minutes. They might need to go a little bit shorter, but in all honesty, out of the like 5 batches of French fries I've made this week, this one batch this afternoon that I wanted as a demo is the only one where that last 25 minutes was too long. It's just sometimes ovens are inconsistent. So keep an eye on it. That 25 minutes is probably going to be fine. But the 25-minute timer just went off. I want you to see what the color looks like now, and especially the color on the underside of the fries. Bring this over here. You're going to want to use a nice big spatula. That's interesting. If you get in close, you can hear the moisture coming off. It's almost like it's whistling right now. Oh, this is kind of cool. You can see the difference in color of some of these that got a little too much color, like this guy, and some of these that got perfect color here. to halfway through, we don't really see much color yet. But what we want to do is get under here and just flip these over, and you'll see there's a lot more color on the underside because the metal is a lot more efficient at transferring heat. And you don't need to be perfect. You don't have to flip everyone individually and make sure that it's flipped perfectly. We just want to, for the most part, flip them. Partially because the flipping process is kind of a pain. So this is a really great example. This fry right here. This fry here has significantly more color because that portion was touching the bottom of the pan. If I were to compare it to, say, this fry, this hasn't been flipped over yet, so it looks fairly pale. And hopefully I'm not giving you motion sickness every time I flip the camera around like that. And sometimes don't be too afraid to let things just cook a little longer. Often a little bit longer, a little more darkness can equal a lot more flavors. There. Okay, that's good. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. I'm going to throw these back in, and we're going to do another 12 minutes. And that's going to be halfway through our 25-minute total. So to finish off your fries, so we've got the 12 minutes, I'm going to rotate the pan, and then we'll finish up that 25. So it'll be an additional 13. It'll be done. They shouldn't need any more time than that. They should have plenty of color at that point. What we're going to do is when they're done there, we're going to take them out and put them into a bowl. And in that bowl, we're going to then add some salt. We can add some more pepper if you want some more pepper, and any other seasonings that you want at this point. So that will be the point where you're going to add that garlic that we fried up earlier. Just sprinkle it on top, toss it around. If your fries are looking a little dry or you want a little oiliness to it, if you did the garlic with the oil before, the oil's plenty cool now. You can drizzle a little bit out of that on top too. That'll kind of soak some of that garlicky flavor into your fries as well. That's it. If you want to use for seasonings, a couple things that work really well: rosemary, thyme, chili powder. Those all work really well. Just some salt, and then any of those seasonings. If you didn't do the garlic that we did before, you can use garlic powder, and that's a really great way to season it. And again, I'm not giving you measurements because you've got your own taste and flavor profiles. So put a little on there and taste one. Put a little on there, toss it around so you've got an even coating, taste one. See how it tastes. It's a really big part of cooking. Tasting your food as you're making it helps inform how much you should season it and how effective those seasonings are. So one thing we're going to keep doing in the future is we're going to keep tasting our foods as we're cooking them. So we know, does this need more salt? Does this need more pepper? Does this need more garlic powder? Or did I overdo it and do I now need to find a way to fix it? Which is another thing that can happen sometimes. But if we're tasting as we're seasoning, far less likely that we over season something than if we just wait till the end to season it. So put a little bit of whatever you want to put on there. Taste one. If it's good, you're good. You put enough seasoning on. If you don't really taste it, add a little bit more. If you taste it but you want more, add more. It's your food. You get to do it. So that's how you're going to finish your fries. Congratulate yourselves for doing this.